In an industry saturated with established practices and genres, it's rare to find a game that completely catches the savvy gamer off guard. Some games have incredible graphics, others have well-told stories, and still more have quirks of gameplay we haven't seen before. But there's always a sense of convention and familiarity. Stanley Parable is the exception. It laughs in the face of convention, and for the most part, I was laughing along with it. You begin the game in the shoes of Stanley, a nondescript corporate drone with one job: press buttons on a keyboard that the computer monitor tells him to. We are told by a narrator that Stanley loves his job, that he is surprised to discover that everyone in the office has disappeared without a trace. The narrator then attempts to lead the player through a story of his own design through omniscient voiceover, but, as a friend of mine told me when she recommended the game, it's really fun to piss him off. Which you can, for the level of design and gameplay are inseparable from the story of Stanley Parable. By no means do you have to stick with what the narrator wants you to do. The story is completely decided by the choices you make, with more than 20 different endings discovered so far. For every path you choose, the narrator reacts a different way, whether he tries to make the best of your ill attempts to follow his story, or ineffectually insults your intelligence. The dialogue is a goldmine, and I found myself chuckling uncontrollably several times in the course of my playthroughs. In terms of raw gameplay, you don't have many options. From first-person perspective, you can walk around the rooms at a steady pace and interact with computers and open doors with the left mouse button. Other than that, you really can't do anything else, not even jump. This, however, was probably intentional on the developer's part, limiting the player as much as possible so they would be free to make the different paths without worrying about players getting off the rails. I found that I didn't really miss jumping all that much, though the left mouse button was a bit temperamental, not always as responsive as I would have liked. The overall design of the game is stark, much like the control scheme, but it's meant to be. You're walking through what is supposed to be an office space styled corporate hell, with everyone else missing, so you wouldn't expect it to be incredibly interesting. That being said, there's a lot of detail if you have a good eye, from snarky comments on the company calendar to video game shoutouts and Easter eggs behind random crates. The world feels both lived in and meticulous, and it really feels like the developers thought of everything. Like in this instance, where it seemed like you could.
Wait, Stanley thought to himself. Am I sure that the orders stopped coming in? How is that possible? They never stopped. Surely I was mistaken. At first, Stanley assumed he'd broken the map, until he heard this narration and realized it was part of the game's design all along. He then praised the game for its insightful and witty commentary into the nature of video game structure and its examination of structural narrative tropes. So, now that you're here, what do you think? Isn't this a fun and unique place to be? Why don't we take a minute just to drink it all in? Okay, I'm over it now. What do you think? Are you sick of this gag yet?
But can you play the game again? Absolutely. The game is built on starting from the beginning several times and seeing what other choices you can make if you start over. Depending on which ending you come across, it can take anywhere from 5 minutes to an hour to complete the individual story. And sometimes the story only progresses if you start from the beginning, so there's a lot of room for additional playthroughs. However, I recommend not looking up additional endings on the internet until you're sure you've tried as much as you can. You're definitely going to miss a few, but it feels much more satisfying to find them yourself. But here's what I think overall about Stanley Parable. The story gets a 9.3. The individual narrative arcs aren't very substantial, but if you put in the importance of choice and add the hilarious narrator into the mix, you get a really engaging narrative experience. The gameplay gets an 8.5. Some unresponsive controls aside, it's a testament to the gameplay design that I didn't miss the jump button, and they squeezed all the use they possibly can out of WASD, the mouse, and even the not very used crouch button. The design gets a 10. The attention to detail the developers paid to the environment is apparent, and the level design itself is so unique and interesting, in spite of the dystopian corporate setting, that I can't help but nail it with top marks. Presentation also gets a 10. There were no points where I got frustrated with the game, and the immense attention they paid to player choice makes it a standout. And finally, replay value gets a 9.5. This game is built around playing it over again and making different choices you didn't make before, and executes it engagingly for at least 8 hours worth of gameplay, which is pretty good for an indie title. Overall, Stanley Parable earned itself a 9.5. It's a game that says a lot with a little, and I can't respect that enough.